Good evening, everyone. Welcome to FASD Hub Scotland webinar. We are delighted that so many of you are registered and have been able to join us this evening. My name is Jo Grofflow. I am an FASD advisor for the Hub, supported this evening by our project lead, Barbara Oxton, who's managing the admin and checking the chat. So if you've got any problems at all, feel free to post any questions there. I'm hoping that everybody is pretty much okay with the Zoom functions, but if you have got any problems at all, please type in the chat. Barbara will be more than willing to help you. So without further ado, our guests this evening are the wonderful Mike and Kristin Berry, who are the co-founders of the Honestly Adoption Company and have been parents for nearly 2 decades. They are the authors of 6 books and host the Honestly Adoption podcast, one of my favorites that I listen to on a regular basis. I've been a fan for quite a long time, so I was really desperate to get them on board. I had read Kristin's book, Born Broken, being a parent to a 12-year-old with FASD. And yeah, regularly listen to their podcast, have done their Insight conference, and I just felt they had so much to offer to our community here in the UK, in Scotland. So reached out to them and I'm delighted to say they agreed and they are here, although they're in pretty dire circumstances on tornado warnings, both of them. So we're hoping and praying and keeping our fingers crossed that they will be able to stay for the entire evening. We have a host of questions that were submitted pre this evening that I have ready to ask them at the end, but please feel free to type any additional questions into the chat. Barbara and I can liaise. So for the time being, I'm going to hand over to Mike and Kristin. I'll turn my screen off and mute myself. Enjoy. I'm sure it'll be wonderful. And I look forward to speaking to you all in a while. Okay, thank you.
Awesome.
Hello.
Well, yeah, it's good to be here. And as Jo said, we are under a tornado. We've been off and on under tornado warnings. Welcome to Indiana, USA. That's the life we lead over here. It's spring. That means there's tornado warnings. No kidding. Earlier today, I was on a call with a coaching client, and I literally had to stop the call and run back into my house because the wind was insane. That's another story. We're okay right now. And we're ready. We're excited to talk to you guys. I'm going to do this. I'm going to share my screen, and we practiced this just a moment ago. So hopefully this works. Kristin, can we see that? Can you see that okay?
Can you see me?
Awesome. I can still see you. Yeah. And hopefully you can see the screen okay. I don't think I can see the chat, but somebody give me a, yep.
I'm
We're getting
a thumbs up.
ahead.
Yep.
Okay. Awesome. So we are super excited when we were asked to come on this, to be a part of this webinar. We love teaching. We love the opportunity to hang out with you. If you've never heard of us, we're Mike and Kristin Berry, co-founders, co-CEOs of the Honestly Adoption Company. We are passionate about helping you, caregiver, dear caregivers, we like to refer to you, become the best caregiver possible. And we do that by providing tools and resources, really to help you change your perspective. That's really what we're all about. And achieve resiliency. And hopefully tonight, for just a few moments, we're able to just infuse some encouragement and some hope through some of the practical strategies that we're going to walk through. And tonight, for a few moments, we're going to talk about how to effectively respond to behaviors. This comes from our behavior response blueprint, our behavior response masterclass. It's a 4-step blueprint to bring calm in the chaos. Yes, it is possible. And I want to start off by showing you a picture from quite a long time ago, because I look a lot younger in this picture and also a lot thinner. I'm speaking about myself, all fingers pointed to me. This is a picture from our family going back, I think 2009. Is that about right, Kristin? 2009, yeah. 2010, right about that. Yeah. This picture brings up a lot of emotions, a lot of thoughts and feelings. for us, mostly because even though we were smiling, and I say it like that intentionally, we were actually in a lot of chaos when this picture was taken. We had our hands full because 3 of these babies had all come to our house, and you guys that are foster caregivers know this, came to our house like kind of at the drop of a hat, like a moment's notice, like, hey, we have a placement available. Could you take them into your home? And we said yes, and quickly realized, man, things are really, really hard, right? Like this is really chaotic. I won't go into details on this, but several of our kids were drug and alcohol exposed in utero, and one of those children put a lot of tension and chaos in our home. And so even though we're smiling in this picture, there was a lot of turmoil going on. And I'm going to show you one other picture. This is fast forward a few years. You notice everybody is a little bit older. Again, Santa Claus is there, right? Everybody's smiling, everybody's happy. But what's really hard about this picture is that one of our children would very soon after this picture end up in residential treatment for extreme behaviors that were really, really hard. And again, this child has an FASD, and we know where the behaviors come from. But back then, the one thing that's important to note about both of these pictures, this picture and this picture, is that we were in a lot of chaos. And part of the reason why we were in chaos is that we did not have the tools that we have today, the resources that we have today, to know how to respond differently. And that's really what it's all about. The transformation, the beginning of our transformational journey, because we're still on this journey, was when we discovered a new perspective on our children. And when we really learned the tools and the resources to understand where the behaviors were coming from, reframe those behaviors in the right context, and then respond differently to our children. So really what changed for us, and this is what we're talking about, is we personally as caregivers had to change our response. So the question is really, how do we effectively respond to behaviors? We as caregivers. The one thing about those pictures, the one thing that you can't really see, is that there were a lot of extreme behaviors, but that it wasn't our children that changed. And that's important to note as we get into this discussion. We were the ones that had to change. So the transformation began when we as caregivers changed our response. I'll be the first to admit, the biggest struggle that I had back in the day when those 2 pictures were taken is that I thought I would look at my kids like, gosh, this behavior is really bad, and you're just a bad kid behaving badly. Because that's the understanding that I had. That's the context I had. But when I learned that there was so much more going on because of the trauma that this child experienced, it allowed me to reframe my perspective and reframe the behavior, because this is what it's about. Behavior response is about us as caregivers. It's about our response to our kids. Most of you know this, that you can't stop, you can't control, and you can't even really manage your children's behaviors effectively, right? Because one day it's positive, the next day it's not. The next 3 days it's positive. The next 5 days it's tough, right? I mean, that's the way it goes. Our children, and we say this often to our coaching clients, our children's behaviors tend to go like this, right? It's like a roller coaster, right? And we as caregivers have to recognize that and take on the position of standing on the ground as the roller coaster goes around and not board the roller coaster ourselves. Super hard to do, right? We cannot expect our kids to change. We must change our response. So that begs the question, where do we begin? And the place that we like to begin when we talk about behavior response is really understanding, framing up how trauma changed the brain. And with that, I'm going to pass the baton over to Kristin, because her explanation of this is spot on. No pressure.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, so this is, it's a super simple way to understand the brain. It's probably something that you guys have already learned before. However, I think it's really important to revisit this explanation all the time for myself. I know that whenever Mike and I are teaching, we're doing this kind of simple overview of the brain, and we always go back home and we're like, that's it. That's what's happening. We know better than this. So we have a really simple, I can't see myself on camera, so I'm hoping, can you see me?
I can see you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that I'm not like gesturing to nobody. That would be embarrassing. So if you are following along with me, I want you to put your hand up. Oh, I got a thumbs up. Thanks, whoever sent the thumbs up. That's so cute. Put your hand up. We're going to talk about just 3 parts of the brain. The first, I want you to point to your thumb. That's going to represent your amygdala. That's the alarm system. We're going to tuck that inside. I want you to fold your hand over with fingers in the front. That's going to represent your prefrontal cortex. That's the front of your brain. The back of your hand, your wrist here, is going to represent your brain stem. Now, the reason that these 3 parts of the brain are so important is that the prefrontal cortex is where logic and reasoning live. This is the part of our brain that helps us to make plans, to organize thoughts, to understand cause and consequence. Our brainstem keeps us alive. This is functioning. For as long as we are alive, our brainstem is making sure that our lungs are breathing in and out, our heart is pumping. That is its sole function. Even if we're asleep at night, brainstem's working. The amygdala is the alarm system. It alerts us that something is wrong. So what happens in our brain is that we may have something's wrong. There's a tornado coming. So the alarm goes off. Our brain flips. We think, oh no, that's not good. We function from our brainstem. Our heart continues to pound. Our lungs continue breathing in and out, but we're not functioning from that prefrontal cortex anymore. So if at some point on this webinar, tornado sirens start to go off, we know we're well practiced. I don't actually know where you guys are from, if tornadoes are a big deal or even a thing, but here we've been practicing since childhood. We drop everything. I'm going to go grab the baby and we're going to run down to the basement. My alarm is going to go off. My prefrontal cortex flips. I say emergency. My brainstem takes over and its job is to keep me alive. Now, when I'm running down to the basement to make sure that I do my very best to protect myself and my kids, am I going to balance my checkbook? Am I going to plan out a menu for the week? Am I going to complete a homework assignment? Am I going to compose some emails? Absolutely not, because that part of my brain isn't functioning at that point. The only part that's working, I love when I can see the chat. Sometimes it's totally distracting. In the chat, it says, we only have child-shaped tornadoes in our homes. Awesome. That can be a whole different thing, and we're going to get to that too. So, all right. So I'm not doing any logical thinking because my whole body's designed to now keep myself alive. So I think I've got a next slide here, Mike. Yes, maybe. Oh, yes. All right. So when we're thinking about our child having that trauma response, there's an emergency happening. The child is hungry. The amygdala lets them know, I'm hungry. The brain flips. I'm going to function from my brainstem. Now, a newborn, they're hungry. Their alarm system goes off. Their brain flips. They're functioning from their brainstem, and then a caregiver meets their need. Over time, the brain learns, hey, when there's an emergency, it's okay. I'm going to have my needs met. That alarm can be tucked back in. The prefrontal cortex works again, and I can continue functioning. Over time, that brain will begin to understand that not everything is a big emergency. Not everything is the house is on fire. Not everything is a tornado. my brain tells me that I'm hungry like a lot during the day. So I get that alarm system. Oh no, you're hungry. What am I going to do? Oh, I know. I've learned this over 45 years. I'm just going to go fix myself a sandwich. Or I might say, it's okay. I can delay that need because I know tonight I'm going to go home and have some dinner. So when we see our children experiencing that, what we're going to experience is that brain flip. I read through a lot of the questions and you're asking these kind of questions, but what do I do when? What do I do when the brain is flipped and the behavior is really, really loud or really, really violent or stealing or talking over people or lying? We want to look at this picture here that Mike's put up. If we had an avalanche and, things are stuck in the road, we're not going to say, okay, just keep driving along that road. What are we going to have to do? We're going to have to bring in some pretty heavy equipment, get all of that debris out of the road, and then continue on. It's the same with our brain. When that alarm is going off, there's nothing we can do until we calm that alarm. So much like a newborn, we're not going to say to the newborn, like, get it together right now, stop crying. We're going to say, oh no, what do you need? You need your diaper changed. You need some food. You need mama to snuggle you. You need to be wrapped in a blanket. You're too hot. You're too cold. We are going to meet that need, calming that alarm. That prefrontal cortex begins to work again, and we're able to function, much like when a road is covered in debris. We're going to have to meet that need first, and then we can continue on. All right, so when we're talking about behaviors, what is it we're seeing? I think that this becomes so difficult. Mike and I are adoptive parents, so we are carrying into this not just the prenatal substance exposure that our kids have experienced, but also the trauma of entering into the foster care system, the trauma of being adopted by another family, losing your first family, losing that person that you grew inside of. So we have trauma on top of prenatal exposure, which is also a trauma. And so when we first became parents, we thought, we'll just meet the child's needs. We'll just be loving and kind, and everything is going to work out great. We both grew up in traditional families. So when we see this list of behaviors that we have here, greedy, lying, manipulation, stealing, fear, aggression, the class clown, hoarding, entitled, defiant, fight, flight, or freeze. We see all those things. And I think growing up in a traditional family, we thought, well, we'll just discipline out of that. If you see a child being greedy, you say something like, hey, don't be so greedy. That's rude. We don't behave like that in this family. Oh, there's no lying here. We absolutely don't manipulate. If you want something, just ask me for it. So we kind of came at our parenting with this traditional understanding of parenting. We will just discipline the behaviors out. What we realized is that this list of behaviors that kind of had us in that chaos that Mike was talking about, those behaviors, they were actually masking something entirely different. So some of these undesirable things that we were seeing were really just a warning sign, a symptom. They're covering up what's really going on. So this is just a sketch that I drew after listening to Jeff Noble, who I think you guys are familiar with also, who said, anger is just sad's bodyguard. That really had an effect on us, and we'll get into talking about some of the details later. We have 2 kids who tend to go toward anger, and that's surprising for us sometimes as parents. At first we were like, gosh, why are you yelling all the time? Why are you throwing things? There's no need to throw things. I'm just offering you some broccoli for dinner. You don't have to like gag and throw up. You don't have to flip your chair over. But when I heard Jeff Noble say that phrase, anger is sad's bodyguard, that shifted my perspective with the anger that was going on with our children. And it made us begin to think, what are those other things that we're seeing? What is greedy really? We know that we had a child who was behaving in a way that was greedy. I was working for an after-school program with lower income families. And, we had a child who kept going through the line and trying to grab extra snacks and stick it into his pocket. And one of the volunteers came over and said, I'm really, really worried about that kid. He keeps stealing all the food. He's being so greedy. I wonder what's going on. What a rude kid. Well, maybe things are terrible at home. And I had to say, well, actually, that one's my kid. So that was embarrassing for them, not me, because my kid was behaving in a greedy way, because when my child was a newborn, they were extremely malnourished. So even to this day, that particular child is now a teenager. That child needs to know when they're going to be fed, is there going to be enough food? Because we remember back to that example of the brain, that alarm system is going off constantly for that child. So greedy is food insecurity for this child. Anger, that thing that's making my kid's brain flip, that's really sad. That's really loss. So we know that what we're seeing is probably covering up something very different.
Yeah. So that begs the question, what do we do? Because, and a lot, as Kristin said a moment ago, you probably have the lay of the land. A lot of you have been on this journey for a while. You have the lay of the land in terms of, how trauma impacts the brain. And in terms of drug and alcohol exposure, you've probably learned exactly how alcohol exposure, drug exposure impacts the brain. So what do we do? Well, one of the things that we have discovered over our journey that has really helped us is a really simple 4-step plan that we call our behavior response blueprint. And we're actually going to give you a link here in just a moment on how you can actually download your very own behavior response blueprint. But real quick, this is what the 4-step response plan looks like. I'm going to put these all up on the screen, right? It's 4 steps: regulate, validate, investigate, re-regulate, right? So when that amygdala flips, and the prefrontal cortex is overridden, that neural pathway is now suddenly like disrupted. It's like the landslide, like Kristin was talking about, the rock slide, and your child is suddenly dysregulated, and you're seeing these behaviors escalate, right? What the most important thing you can do, the most important response step, really has to do with us first and foremost. We must regulate ourselves first as caregivers. Here's what we discovered. Here's what I discovered. And I'm going to just totally pick on myself with this. All the way back when, years ago, when we showed you those 2 pictures, that was 2009, I think 2011 or so, 2012. One of the biggest problems in terms of the emotional regulation was me. Because here's what would happen. My child would flip, right? Become dysregulated. And you guys know this as parents of children who have been drug and alcohol exposed. You know how this goes, right? This is moment to moment. One moment, everything's great. The next moment, it's a volcano erupting, right? And sometimes there's absolutely no correlation. That's why our good friend, Dr. Ira Chasnoff, and his son, Gabe Chasnoff, dear friends of ours, created the amazing documentary Moment to Moment, Teens Growing Up with an FASD. If you haven't watched that, you need to order that, because it's insightful, and it absolutely describes that moment to moment. Like, whoa, we just went to the park. We just went to the zoo. Everybody was happy. Everybody was loving their life. And now all of a sudden, everybody hates everybody. There's tears. There's meltdowns. It's not just a dumpster fire. It's tires on fire inside of a dumpster. It's all falling apart, right? Well, here's what would happen with me personally. When that would happen, when my child would start to escalate, here's what I would do. I'd try to go one step further. Or you're gonna raise your voice. I'm gonna raise my voice. You're gonna start destroying things. Well, I'm gonna start lecturing, right? You're gonna not listen to me. Well, then I'm gonna threaten. And here's what would happen. The flame would just burn brighter. What I discovered was every time my child would escalate, and then I would escalate, and then they would escalate, and then I would go further, and I would just get louder and louder and threaten and lecture and you name it, and you're going to time out, and you're not going to be able to do this, you're going to be able to do this. It was like I was trying to extinguish a campfire with a can of gasoline. Newsflash, if you've never been camping, don't try that, because what happens is the flames burn brighter. You get the idea, right? we have got to regulate ourselves first as caregivers. If our emotions aren't in check, we can't expect our children's to be. We can be the biggest trigger for our children. I know that's stepping on your toes, but that's what we discovered on this journey. And it is a process, it's a work in progress to work to regulate ourselves. And if we had way more time, we would go into a full-blown teaching section on ways to regulate yourselves. But the point is this: you have to regulate yourself first. Number two, validate the emotions the child is expressing. Here's some truth about your children. Some of your children have experienced significant loss, and they are dealing with unrealized and unending grief. And back to what Kristin was talking about, those survival behaviors, a lot of your kids have learned to meet their own needs through behaviors because they don't know how to articulate that unmet need, right? So what they do is they blow up, they move into survival mode. It's fight, fight, fight all the time because that's how they've learned to survive. And oftentimes the emotions that you're seeing are that they're simply trying to get somebody to see that there's something wrong. So a powerful step to effective behavior response is to simply validate the emotions your child is expressing and experiencing. And that's as simple as saying, in the middle of that temperature rising, stopping and saying, hey, listen, I can tell you're upset. That's okay. Or, hey, whoa, looks like you're upset. Looks like you're frustrated right now. And I know some of you would be like, yeah, my kid says, yeah, I am. I'm really, really mad. Rah, you know, but simply stopping and saying, hey, listen, okay, so-and-so hurt your feelings. Man, that would hurt my feelings too. I was just on a call with a client, a coaching client that I'm working with, and there were tears. She was emotional about something that she was experiencing. And the first thing I said to her was, Melody, it's okay. I would feel the exact same way. She's an adult. And watching her emotions start to re-regulate, it works to simply say, hey, I see you. I see that you're upset. I see that you're going through something. You know this. I know this because when we're frustrated, we don't want somebody to come in and say, okay, you really need to get it together right now. You really need to stop doing that, right? Yeah, listen, this is not that big of a deal. Stop freaking out. Sometimes I just need someone to say, hey, listen, I know that really sucks. I'm sorry you're going through that, right? So validate the emotions your child is expressing. Number three, investigate the behavior. One of the biggest things that we've learned on our journey is that behaviors are a window. All human behavior has an origin. Do you realize that? You're sitting there listening to us, watching us right now, and maybe you feel happy right now. There's a reason for that. You didn't just wake up and think, hey, wow, I'm just happy for no reason. Likewise, if you're mad, if you're frustrated, there's a reason for that, right? There's a reason for all of our emotions, and our feelings, right? Our children's behaviors are a window into something bigger. Like the slide that we showed a moment ago when Kristin was talking about trauma's impact. We never should take the behaviors at face value. They're a bodyguard for something else. They're an opaque veil that's covering up what's really going on. One of the most powerful things that I learned was that I should never take my children's behavior at face value, right? So if I'm taking their behavior at face value, then what's really going on, right? Well, this is just a bad kid behaving badly. But if I step back and I remind myself, this is a window into something bigger. This is now no longer just a bad kid behaving badly. This is a child trying to meet an unmet need, trying to express something bigger, right? So number three, investigate the child's behavior. And number four, help your child re-regulate, right? Kristin said it a moment ago. When that brain flips and that neural pathway is suddenly corroded, disrupted, you know this as well as I do. The last thing that works is for you to say, what is wrong with you, right? The reason for that is because discipline and correction, which by the way, has a place in behavior response, right? It's not like we're saying, oh, no, you don't need to discipline or correct. No, you do. It's just not the first thing you do. And here's why. Correction and discipline require logic to be understood, right? But if the brain is flipped and functionality is out of the brain stem, and this part of the brain where logic and reasoning is completely overridden, guess what? The logical conclusion that, hey, you just need to get it together and not do those kind of things is not even getting through. The first step in helping in effectively responding to behaviors is helping your child re-regulate. You've got to get your child's brain calmed back down first. And then you can say, you know what you said to your sister was really, really mean, or you destroyed a lot of things and it was really scary. And so, hey, we need to work to make this right. Right. And I think that you probably need to, tell your sister you're sorry. That doesn't work to look at your child when they're blowing up and say, you can't talk like that. You can't call your sister those names. You can't break things, right? That's not getting through because they're in survival mode. So help your child re-regulate first. So that's our 4-step response plan. One of the things that, and this is the point I was just making, there's no such thing as a bad kid. When you realize what's really going on and you can reframe the behaviors in the right context, knowing that, oh, because they've experienced this and this and this, that has dictated the behaviors I'm seeing. Then you suddenly realize this is not just a bad kid trying to ruin the day. This is a child who's trying to express an unmet need. And when it comes to needs, we as caregivers need to meet the needs first and foremost, instead of trying to change the behavior. Because as I said at the beginning, we can't really change the behaviors. We can't even stop the behaviors. Now, over time, healing can take place. And I believe these four blueprint strategies that we just walked you through, they work because they work for us, but they work when we apply them on a consistent basis, right? It's a journey, not a destination. So real quick, and I'll drop the links into the chat, and then we're going to jump into Q&A time because you guys asked some killer questions. The behavior response blueprint, this is a free resource that we created. You can get it by visiting honestlyadoption.com/blueprint. And I will drop this link into the chat here in just a moment. But this is our proven 4-step plan to help you re-regulate your child and build connection. And here's the great thing about this blueprint. We actually, along with those 4 principles, which we detail, we've also included scripts, go-to phrases, statements, and words that you can use in the heat of the moment to help navigate some of these sticky situations, right? So that's a free download. And then the other thing that I will share with you is, based on what Kristin was talking about, the simple understanding of how trauma impacts the brain, we created a video and worksheet called Trauma Knowledge 101. This is an 18-minute teaching video with Kristin, filmed in Hawaii, by the way. That was super cool. But you can download this, and this actually walks you through on a deeper level, how trauma changes the brain, the difference between chronic trauma, acute trauma, plus a simple framework for, responding to your child that helps bring healing. So those are 2 free downloads. And the last thing, I guess I'll go ahead and put this up here. Joe mentioned that we are hosting our Insight virtual conference here in just a couple of weeks. We created a special coupon code just for you guys. 20% off ticket prices. Use the code FASDWEB. That's short for FASD webinar. But honestlyadoption.com/insight. Use that coupon code. I'm just going to leave that up on the screen and jump over to chat. So questions. This is a good time to go into questions.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike, because we've got
Okay.
we asked everybody if they wanted to submit questions before, and we've got quite a few questions, as you know, that I'd like to sort of pose to you both. But first of all, just to say thank you. It was amazing. It was amazing for me just as a parent, not only not just in my role, but as a parent, to listen to that, because it just reiterates everything that I think we all need to remember, that sometimes we when we're in that moment, we don't always remember what to do with our as a parent. So yeah, so if I could pose some of the questions, that would be great. Anybody else who wants to add any additional questions into the chat, that would be amazing, and you're more than welcome. So we have quite a lot of questions, so I've picked out the ones that I think people
we love it
within our community might want to hear, and then I'll do those first and then I'll go back. So one of them was, how can I help support my birth child understand her sister's impulsive behavior?
So I think this is much like any disability or any difference in personality. We know that FASD is a spectrum. And so when we're trying to help our other kids navigate what's going on with a child who may be, really high there on the spectrum, it's really important to gather that information and think about your words ahead of time. So decide, how old is this child that I'm explaining to? Does this child understand that diagnoses of any kind are private? And that is not for them to go then share with other people. So how much information can I give and reasonably understand that this child, or reasonably I expect that this child will expect the other child's privacy? Having said that, there are a ton of great resources. I actually, oh, dang it, I just copied a different one, and I'm going to drop one in the chat here because it answers quite a few of the questions that I saw come through. This is called Indiana Alliance on Prenatal Substance Exposure. It's from our state, but they link to tons of different information from all over the world. And they have great ideas for simple explanations for prenatal substance exposure that a child could understand. A simple one sheet that you can send to your child's teacher at school. So this is kind of our go-to website. And like I said, not all the information is theirs. They do an amazing job of linking you up to all kinds of resources from all over the world. And on there is a pretty easy to understand explanation of what an FASD is, or what prenatal substance exposure is, that I would feel very comfortable sharing with a child of pretty much any age.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. This is like a really interesting question because I think it's so broad, so not probably the easiest to answer, but what would you suggest not doing?
Oh my gosh, what would I suggest not doing? All kinds of things.
Yeah, that's what I thought. When I read it, I was just like, that's like the biggest, longest answer going.
Right. Don't get all of your children a dog during a pandemic. Nobody needs to have 4 or 5 dogs running around. So that's advice number 1. Nobody needs to do that. In all seriousness, what would I not do? Probably my top, what would I not do? I would not respond to my children the way that I used to 20 years ago. I would not, I guess this comes into what would I do, because I tried to do positive. What would I do instead? I would respond to my children the same way that I would respond to a newborn. So when a newborn is screaming bloody murder, I mean, we might be really, really, really frustrated, but we're not going to say to the newborn, you better cut that out right now. I'm not getting you any food until you apologize for screaming and keeping me up all night. You know better than this. You really should just explain what you want. We know we wouldn't talk to infants that way. We're going to need to remember that as we're raising our children, they are very likely half of their age. Socially, emotionally, they may be way less than half of their age. So we're going to want to respond that way. Even if this child is 19 years old, we're going to want to respond the same way we would with an infant. So seems like you're really upset right now. What can I do to help you? Oh, I don't like when you call me that name, and I can tell that you're very angry. I'm going to give it a minute and let's check in again. Do you think that you might be tired, thirsty, hungry? Did you get a good sleep last night? So we're kind of offering those things very much in the same way you do with an infant. You try changing their diaper first. Maybe that wasn't it. You try giving them a bottle. Maybe that wasn't it. you're actually doing the same thing even as our kids get older, because they may not be able to access that part of their brain. So I guess that wasn't a what would I not do, but I just wouldn't respond the way that I used to 20 years ago.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, Kristin, because I you know, I support families as well, and in my role, one of the really interesting things that I often hear is about children saying, "Don't shout," and I'm like, but do you actually shout, or is it just a change of tone? Because I know for myself as a parent in my house, my daughter will say I shout when I just say, "Give me your phone now." And I haven't actually raised volume. I've just changed tone. So I think it's such a fine line to walk that balance to find what is appropriate for your child. And I think that's like a really good thing to think about a baby, because you would never ever raise your voice. And I think as parents, we probably think we don't, but you know, we're all human. Maybe we do. I think I changed tone, definitely. But maybe my daughter thinks that's shouting.
I think that's a really important point too, because many of our kids, wherever they are on that spectrum, have difficulty with social awareness.
Yeah.
And they very much can misinterpret all kinds of things. That person is my best friend. That person hates me. Very often that's just kind of a skewed perspective. So you're just saying, as you should, especially with a child with an FASD, give me your phone. Because we need direct requests. However, our kids may be hearing something wildly different, and that could actually be because of the FASD.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, another one, how to reduce the violence. So somebody said, we use MVR, but sometimes it doesn't work. So if they're using non-resistance violence training, so what could they do if that doesn't work?
Did you have I didn't want to take all the answers, Mike.
Sorry. No, you're fine. You're fine. Kristin I always default to Kristin. She is just way better at Q&As. I love Q&A, but Kristin's the bomb at it, just so you know. You know, I guess what I would say is here's a little bit of backstory for us, and I'll try to keep this as brief as possible. One of our older children, who's now a young adult, I would consider to be the most extreme situation. I mean, we're talking like in trouble with the police. It has been extremely violent, and has really put our family in a lot of turmoil. This is really messy, because depending on the level of trauma that this child has experienced, it can be unpredictable. What I have personally found helpful, and this is back to what we were talking about with that four-step response, is that the starting point has to be with me, right? The times with this child I'm referencing that it has escalated quickly and become extremely violent. I will fully admit they were the times where I wasn't fully in control of myself. Like I had let my emotions get the best of me, right? And drawn into the moment. But for the last year that this child was in our care full time, we actually had this is a whole other story, but we had a separate residence that we were maintaining because this child couldn't be in our home with our other kids. So Kristin and I would take turns living at this other resident with our child. And while we were in that residence, oftentimes, especially after school, this child would escalate quickly. And what really kind of squelched the potential violence was when I didn't bite on the hook, so to speak, that I didn't allow myself to be drawn in, right? In terms of like how to actually physically stop it, that's a really tricky tricky place, because sometimes as caregivers, we are going to be smack in the middle of it, and we are going to have to stand between our violent child and our other children. We have been in that place. So initially, I would say it begins with us. Kristin, I don't know if you want to tag on to that.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't feel like a super hopeful answer. I think that even when I thought that we were responding appropriately and reducing that violent behavior, I look back now and I see that we weren't, or we were, but not to the level that I think that we should have. We still engaged with, there was always that point where we engaged with it. We have found some success in reducing that violent behavior with our children by planning for that outside of the actual action. Even when our kids are saying, but I don't really care, they had it coming, they deserved it, it's your fault anyway, well, next time I really will break all the chairs in the house. They may be saying that, but we know that, and I wrote this down for a different answer, but Dr. Chasnoff refers to our children as 5-second children in a 1-second world.
Yeah.
So we know that, well, we're responding like this. How dare you? Don't pick up that chair. Put it down right now. You can't run away right now. We know that, if we kind of envision that our words are taking 10 times as long to get to their ears, we begin to see that if we anticipate that slow motion response, we can begin to move our other kids someplace else. We can begin to move ourselves someplace else. We can count in our head to 100. We can say, I see that you're holding the chair. I really hope that you don't throw it.
Yeah.
I'd really like you to put it down. I'm thinking about getting a bowl of cereal. Would you like one? Now, does that work like this? No, because remember that it's taking 10 times longer to get into their brain. So we might, I wouldn't turn my back to a violent kid, but I might shimmy on over and start pouring their favorite cereal in a bowl. We're giving like a lot of outs to the violent behavior. And what we noticed is that sometimes our kids will take it. Sometimes they don't, and we have to respond in the way that just protects.
A really good illustration to keep in mind when it comes to what Kristin just said, a 5-second kid in a 1-second world. It's the difference between an aircraft carrier and a speedboat turning in the ocean. If you've ever watched an aircraft carrier turn, it takes an enormous amount of time in space. Whoa, big, like sometimes it can take up to 2 hours, right? Versus a speedboat, just flip around just like that, right? Remember that our kids' brains are like the aircraft carrier, like a lot of time, a lot of space, right? So sometimes us just holding that space can be a de-escalator. Not always, but we've seen a lot of success with that.
But sometimes, which is good.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
So somebody's just typed in the chat, how do you support other children to stay calm in the face of their sibling escalating? Because they seem to feed off each other. And I personally experienced this because I have a 17-year-old who doesn't have an FASD diagnosis and a 12-year-old who does. And he gets so angry for a million reasons. So it's not always her behaviors. It's sometimes for her, it's just like, she doesn't engage, but I'm guessing for these people, it's like escalating behaviors.
Yeah. Sure. I think that the biggest learning and support is going to happen outside of the escalating behavior. So that's going to be taking that child out for a coffee or a hot chocolate or something. It's spending time with that child separately and talking through, hey, I know what happened last Saturday. That didn't feel great for anyone. I know it's really hard for you in the midst of that to not engage, but then we all end up feeling worse. I know you're feeling worse. Can we do this instead? Creating a plan so that they have a plan of action that just belongs to them. So that could be a safety plan. That could be, and an emotional safety plan. We're always thinking about those big violent behaviors, but sometimes it's just exhausting to listen to the other child who says mean things all the time, or, just agitates. So what's going to be your plan of action? If you notice it escalating, can you, get more time on, well, we always say Spotify, but like whatever, streaming service music. That's my kids' go-to right now. Sure, you're gonna have all the time you want on Spotify. I'm not even gonna check to see if it was explicit or what. Fine, put your, AirPods in and sit in the car and ignore the other child. But we already have that plan in place. We already have a plan, go to your room and I'll get you an extra special snack, but we're making that plan outside of it so that they can have some success. And then we're touching base once that's over. I noticed today that you did a really good job ignoring, and I realized you lost your cool after an hour. Hey, we all make mistakes. So we're just trying to get the other children to understand what's happening, and then also understand that they're humans. Very much like Mike and I always get the question, how do you stay so calm? We don't. We're human. We're trying. So if calm is the standard, that's what we're going for. That's what we're teaching. But keeping in mind, we're humans too. And our kids are going to be too. Sometimes they're going to blow up and they're going to have to bring it back down. And you're going to have to say, like, that wasn't the ideal response, but I get it. You were pretty mad today.
Yeah. Fabulous. How do you not get tangled up in blocked care?
I have a book I'm going to share with you. Let's see if that is that.
We just did a podcast episode on this, the most recent podcast episode. So if you go to honestlyadoption.com/podcast, you can find that it's the latest episode with our good friends Lisa Qualls and Melissa Corkum, who they're our go-to when it comes to blocked care, understanding blocked care. In terms of that question, like, how do you not get tangled up in it? I don't know if you can not get tangled up, if I said that right? Because we're humans and we feel we're experiencing this journey personally, right? So we can say all day long, wow, this isn't personal, right? Their behavior is because of trauma. But guess what? It still feels really stinking personal. because we're personally involved in this, right? So getting tangled up in it, I wouldn't want somebody to beat themselves up trying to not feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm a failure because I'm feeling blocked. I'm experiencing blocked care, right? You're a human. So give yourself some grace, give yourself some compassion. But now let's talk about how do you get out of blocked care? How do you regain compassion, as our friend's book is entitled, Regain Compassion. So Kristin, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, probably the most important thing for me personally is having at least one person, if not a community of people that I can talk it over with. So in the moment, we're remembering that, and blocked care is that, well, it's exactly what it sounds like. It is, I am resistant to attaching to this child, probably in part because that child is resistant to attaching to me. There's all kinds of science that goes into that and a lot of in-depth research on that. So knowing that, the most important thing for me is to be able to, sit down with a good friend who understands FASDs, understands prenatal exposure trauma, foster care and adoption. And I can say, man, I'm just ticked at my kid. I just don't understand. I tried so hard and they didn't love me back, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Having that person, I usually just, we have a drink, have a coffee, I leave and I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go back and try again. That's how I don't get stuck.
Yeah. Okay. I think we've got time for another question. So I think this is probably one that a lot of people experience. So I'm going to end on this one. So how would you say is best to regulate a child at bedtime, and also how to deal with the anger around sleeping?
Wow. Yeah. Do you want me to go first, Kristin? So the one thing that our friends, our very, very dear friends discovered several years ago with their child who has an FASD is that he was blowing up at bedtime. And part of the reason, to make this story really quick, part of the reason he was blowing up at bedtime kind of goes back to what we were talking about, the aircraft carrier versus the speedboat, is that his bedtime was at 8:30, and at 8:20, 8:25, his parents were saying, "Oh man, it's time to go to bed. You gotta go to bed. You gotta brush your teeth. You gotta change your clothes. You gotta take a shower, right? All this in 10 minutes." Wow, that's a speedboat turn, right? Now, me as a neurotypical child, Kristin as a neurotypical child, I could have been told at 8, and some of our other kids that are more so neurotypical can be told, like, yeah, hey, let's go, chop, 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 chop. But this child needed a lot more time and space to make the turn. And when they discovered that, and they started telling him at 8 p.m. versus 8:20, 8:25, they saw a drastic reduction in the length and the amount of tantrums, because his brain and I can tell you story after story in all different contexts, how that time and space became a game changer. So the initial going to bed and the frustration around that, I think when you allow a little more time and space for a transition like that, you're going to see a different result. So I'm going to stop there and hand the baton over to Kristin.
Yeah, the last thing I would add to that is adjust your expectation. Decide what it is that you want and figure out how you can get there. Again, remembering that the child, whatever age, is very similar to the way a newborn's brain might be working. So we might be angry with the newborn. I'm just being honest, that it is so frustrating when they won't sleep. But we're going to do everything we can to get them to feel comfortable and safe and ready for bed. We're going to do the same thing even with an older child. So we may be adjusting our expectation. Maybe it wasn't like that for us as a kid. We want the light off at 8 p.m. But we may have to say, hey, it's okay. I know that sleeping's been really difficult for you. I'm going to leave this flashlight in your room and you can read. I'm going to leave your nightlight right next to your bed and you can, play with these 2 toys. We're not going to have Disneyland in there because that's not helpful either. But I would say really adjust your expectations and see if you can shift so that they're not so angry and they might be able to wind down a little easier.
Thank you so much. Okay, guys, I think we are coming to the end of this now. So I'd just like to say a massive thank you to Kristin and Mike for being with us this evening. Please check out all the links in the chat, sign up for the Insight Conference. Thank you so much to both of you. It's been brilliant. I'm sure our community have loved it. I've got a lot from it myself. If you've got any questions or comments, feel free to get in touch with us at the Hub. I'm sure we can liaise with Mike and Kristin. In the meantime, have a lovely evening. Thanks for joining us. Take care of yourselves. Glad to see that the berries have not been hit by a tornado.
Nope, we're in the clear now. We're in the clear.
You're in the clear. So thank you all so much, guys. Thank you.